예정이니까요. 끝까지 함께해 주시고 내일도 4개의 발표가 이어지겠습니다. 내일까지 많은 참여 부탁드리겠습니다. 네, 그럼 지금부터 임당유적 전시관 국제학술세미나를 시작해 보겠습니다. 먼저 영국리버풀존무어스대학교 제시카리우 책임연구원님을 모시고 과거인물의 얼굴재현이란 주제로 발표를 들어보겠습니다. 책임연구원님을 박수로 모시겠습니다. 네, 마이크를 사용하시면 되고요. 편하게 시작해 주십시오.
Hello, very nice to see everybody. My name's Jessica, Dr. Jessica Liu, and I represent FaceLab from the Liverpool John Moores University. My role, my daily job, I'm the project manager of FaceLab, and I manage all the archaeological portfolio of the lab. So I do research as well as manage the enterprise projects. So today, the talk is going to be about 40 minutes, and we're going to talk about roughly about the process, and we're going to talk about the forensic portfolio, and more so on the archaeological portfolio of the lab. So just at the back of your mind to think about the practice of facial depictions. Is it an art? Is it a science? It is somewhere in the middle, but I guess it's for you to decide at the end of the talk. So currently, FaceLab offers research and also enterprise projects in both archaeological and the forensic realm. In the forensic side, when the police finds a skeleton and they don't know who it is, they'll come and ask us to produce a face, and when we produce a face, hopefully somebody will recognize who it is and to make an identification of the deceased. In terms of archaeological projects, that's a little bit different because we're dealing with historical individuals and we're trying to paint a picture, paint a history in the museum, telling people what the people might have looked like. This is the lab. It's made up of quite a few of us now, and the lab is continuing to grow. On the bottom row there, we've got about 4 PGR students, meaning they're all PhD students researching in the lab, and it's guided by Professor Caroline Wilkinson as the lab director, and you've got 4 staff and also a visiting fellow from South Africa, Catherine Smith. And everyone has very diverse skills. So I myself, I have a background in forensic anthropology, looking at bones and anatomy. My colleagues, some of them have backgrounds in fine art, in illustration. So it is very diverse, and the way we work is very collaborative in contributing to different areas of the facial depiction projects. So this is the process of how we depict a face. First, we must digitize the skull. Digitize meaning that we need to turn the bones into a 3D model and bring it into the computer. And you can do that by scanning, or by CT scanning, or medical imaging. And then we bring it into the software that we use called Freeform, where we're able to touch and feel the haptic device, touch and feel the face that is in the computer. And then you can see the face is built up by guided by different facial soft tissue depths. And depending on where you are, you will use different soft tissue depths to guide on how much flesh you have on the face. You will also do different measurements to predict what the soft tissue looks like. So for example, you will do a few measurements to predict how much the nose will project out from the face. And also you will put the eyeballs inside the eye socket and the lips covering the teeth. After you've put the features on, you will also have the muscles to guide the shape of the face, and then you will have the skin layer on so that you can have the 3D model of the skull, 3D model of the face, sorry. And here you can see fat layer is being added on to just bulk out the flesh, and then you will generate the skin layer. So why do we do this? So in the forensic context, where we have no or very limited ante-mortem records, meaning that we can't match it to anything. So in a forensic scenario, even though you've collected your dental records, your DNA, you might have collected everything that you can from the body, but you have nothing to match it to. In this case, what you would do is reconstruct the face, you will put it out on social media, on the television. Hopefully when somebody sees that face, they will recognize, oh, that looks like somebody I've not seen before. What we can't do is we can't predict things like facial expressions, wrinkles, skin color, hairstyle, hairline, that kind of thing, cosmetic surgery, whether or not you have tattoos on the skin. These are the things you cannot tell from the skeleton, and that's where the artistic element comes into when we're depicting the faces. And what we're trying to say, we're not producing a portrait of the person, we're producing a likeness of the person. So here are just some of the techniques that we use, and these are all based on anatomical standards. So for example, you would measure different areas of the bone, and then you would measure different areas of the face, and then you have that correlation to find out what's the relationship for the underlying structures with the soft tissue. And you can see, if everybody touched the corner of your, you can feel your eye socket, your eyeball sits inside your eye socket, it can't really go anywhere else. It sort of produced halfway out or on a tangent line so that you can still see within the eye socket. Your lips sort of sits covering your teeth. It can't be wider or smaller, otherwise you'll have trouble eating and you'll have trouble speaking. So in terms of anatomical standards, your facial features sit on where the skull structure is, the underlying structure. And your nose is roughly about 3/5 of the nasal aperture as a ratio. If you touch the corner of your mouth, roughly is where your canines will be, so your sharp teeth, and that's the width of your mouth. Can't really be any wider or smaller, and you can just feel that on your own face. So often a lot of people ask, how accurate are these studies? How accurate is your facial depiction? Many studies have suggested maybe around 60% of the face is within plus or minus 2.5 millimeters when we're talking about metric accuracy. But to be honest, it doesn't really matter, because there are lots of things we don't know about texture. Even though if we can get the shape accurate, sometimes without the textural information, so textural information meaning color, wrinkles, anything more, you might still struggle to recognize the person. Does anybody know who this might be? A-list Hollywood. Angelina Jolie, yes. So this is Angelina Jolie, but if you don't have the textual information, it's a lot more difficult. So even though when the shape is 100% correct, without texture, it's very difficult to recognize a person. And we know that we can't recognize people as well if we don't have texture. So we have to put some texture on to make it convincing as a face. However, what sort of texture would you put on the face? Are these the same or different individuals? Hands up if you think it's the same. Hands up if you think it's different. Different, yeah, different. This is the same. So you can see that by putting different textual information on, the same person can appear to look very different. So not only do we have to predict and put some texture on, we have to put an ambiguous texture on that is ambiguous enough so you're suggesting a texture. And there are many different factors that affect the accuracy, such as body mass, aging, facial accessories modification, and gender presentation of the face. Aging is very interesting because the same 50-year-old can look very different depending on the lifestyle choices and many other factors. So these are some of the successful casework, forensic casework that you can see, where we've reconstructed the face, and this is the person when they were found. So it does work as a method in the forensic realm, And for this case on this side, this person was found dead in Scotland, and when this image was circulated on the news, her neighbour in Ireland recognized who she was and said, oh yeah, that person went missing a few years ago. It ended up that her son has murdered her because of inheritance, and it's very nice to see the set of veneers, so the fake teeth, was on show, because it was a very nice feature on the skeleton. Similarly to that case on the other side, you can see that the man has a very crooked nose, and you can see that from the skeleton because the nose was broken before. So some pathologies you can actually tell and to be depicted on the face on what the person looked like. In terms of presentation for forensic casework, we always depict things quite ambiguously. So things in black and white, if you don't depict the color, you can imagine the color. Male hairlines tends to vary quite a lot. So we will just chop it off here, and what you can't see, you can imagine. And it tends to be quite blurred on the side, so what you don't see, you can imagine. In terms of our forensic portfolio, this is the major thing that we're pushing at the moment, is for people to join our action. This is an action in the European action, funded by European funding, called COST, European Cooperation in Science and Technology. And it basically is a networking grant that brings people together to talk about migrant deaths that is happening across the world, but mostly in the Mediterranean Sea, where people are crossing the borders and people go missing, and trying to bring different methodology and efforts to identify those deceased individuals. So if you're interested, please scan the QR code and for you to join the action. So let's talk about archaeological depiction, because that's what we're here for in Dang Site Museum. It's all about the archaeology. So how does this differ to what we normally do in the forensic world? So in archaeology, the purpose is different. The purpose is not for identification, but for outreach engagement and to enrich historical context, enrich that piece of history. So here we've got an example of 4 faces where they're quite colourful. You see a lot more detail, you can depict a lot more hair colour, skin tone, pore details, that kind of thing. We have managed to publish different chapters in literature to talk about how we make those faces in terms of a methodology, and this is something that I will be talking about. So for those of you who likes technology, for those of you who likes gaming, this is kind of the things you might be able to relate to. So depending on the client and depending on the budget, clients normally, I mean museums, who will come to us and ask, can you put a face on the skeleton so we can display it in the museum? So different clients have different budgets, and different budgets will work with different outputs. And usually what we would do is reconstruct the face using the method that I've shown you before, the same for forensic and the same for archaeology. But the output, or how it's presented in the textual arena, is different. So here we've got a 2D portrait, where mainly we use Photoshop, and we put realistic texture on as a 2D output. What we also do is generate things that are in 3D movie, so generate the CGI in 3-dimensional, making the hair look really realistic, and so you can see it in 3-dimensional as a character, I guess. What we can also do is print it out, dress it with hair, wigs, eyebrows, and things like that, and to put it into a museum as a physical object. So there are many things that can help when we're deciding the unknown. For example, textures. In this case, the skin color, hair color, and also the population of which we can tell. I think Rodrigo is going to talk a lot more about this later. So for this particular case, the phenotypic DNA were provided to depict that this person had fair skin and dark brown hair. So these are things that we could use to help with the depiction of the individual. For this particular case, it's also very interesting because it depicted the medieval movements in Norway. How did people live and where have they traveled from and to? So this individual died quite young, in their early 20s, and they've moved about 800 to 1,000 kilometers to where they were born, and this is based on the isotopic analysis of the skeleton. Sometimes you just can't tell, especially with ancient Egyptian mummy. The mummification process makes it very hard to extract any DNA material. So in this case, when you don't know, usually what we do is produced in a forensic way, where it's black and white. Because if you don't know, you can imagine. And for these cases, we quite like this depiction because it gives the ambiguity of things we don't know. So it's quite nice in a way to showcase this. Sometimes we also have historical records that were given. So I will just read out this little bit of scripture that was actually translated from Latin. So this person was an abbot, so somebody who was important in the church. And it says, before the age of 50, he was said to be sick in spleen, kidneys, liver and stomach, and dependent on a stick. Even at this age, he was very prone to girlish blushing, which left him with a deep red complexion. So with written scriptures that describe the individual, this is something we can put onto the facial depiction to just add a little bit more of that historical accuracy. The historian also provided a drawing. As you can see, it's not very clear on the style of the cloak. So we had to imagine what the shape of the cloak looked like. And I had to say, you've got to give me more information than just this image, because you've got to work out the pattern of the clothing. It's not something we can just fabricate and make up. So the historian then went away and found this garment from the Vatican archive, which we made into a pattern and just wrapped it around the 3D model of the cloak. So the historical accuracy usually is informed by the material that's available and the records that's available. Sometimes the skeleton might indicate diseases. In this case, Robert the Bruce, they suspected he may or may not have syphilis. And in this case, they wanted to depict a mild version of the disease, just because he was a king. If it was advanced stages of leprosy or syphilis, it probably would have been documented in the written scriptures. But nothing was written, so we would assume that if he had the symptoms, it wouldn't be too advanced. So this project also produced a 3D printed bust, and also with a 2D output and also a video output, so it had quite a few different modalities. The interesting thing about this project is that the skeleton was excavated quite a few years ago, and they sealed the tomb afterwards with concrete, I think. Can't remember what they said. And that means you can't get access to the skeleton anymore. So no genetic material were taken from the skeleton. In this case, what they did is they worked from portraits of his descendants to work out what skin color and what hair color and eye color he might have had. And although people wanted to imagine the Scotsman as somebody who had red hair and blue eyes, the genetic probability analysis suggests that it's unlikely that he would have had red hairs and blue eyes. So at the end, they depicted him with more of a neutral tone, with brown hair and brown eyes. Sometimes museums like having work with accessibility. So this is Maidstone Museum, where the display also included a touch object. So the visually impaired can also see the face through touch. And this museum exhibit is also very considerate, because when we're talking about human remains, this was one of the cases where it was very considerate for the individual who visited the museum to choose to whether or not to go see the remains because it's behind the room. So in front of the room it says, behind it you can walk through to see the human remains, as in the mummified body, and you can choose to go and see them or not. So it was very considerate in terms of accessibility and also sensitivity consideration related to human remains. Sometimes you have sites where you would say that this individual is found from a prisoner of war, so perhaps the conditions are not very great, so can you depict them with a little bit more weathered look? And this was a project in conjunction with the MOD, with the Ministry of Defence from the UK. It was very interesting because even though there's the skeleton is a younger man, but they wanted to depict somebody who might have suffered from war. So this was a very interesting case because when we first showed up, we didn't actually know whether or not we can reconstruct the face because it was very fragmented. So the first assessment is there enough cranial material to actually rebuild the skull? If you can rebuild the skull, then you can rebuild the face. But first step is, do you have enough material? And sometimes you just can't tell because those were the pictures that were sent on the left. And based on this, I sat there for like 3-4 hours just doing a skull puzzle, putting the skull back together. And here you can see, actually we did have enough material, but the bits were scanned separately. And we just used masking tape to piece the tapes together and then scanned it using a scanner. And you can see the parts that's missing, we've just been replicated from left to right. This particular case was also on television, where we call the Christmas lectures, as one of the major educational programs in the UK during Christmas time. And the face was presented as part of the Christmas lecture in recreating the life story of this individual on live television. Sometimes we would depict the whole population or an ancient population. So my colleague Maria depicted 50 faces from the Canary Islands in Spain. Spain, but the group of islands is closer to the coast of Africa, a lot more south than where Spain is. And the ancient population perhaps looked quite different before the Spanish has conquered the islands. So this project is also to honor the historical population that also you can see from the people today. So you have the echoing sides of 50 faces from before and 50 faces of the modern people now. So they face each other like a conversation, I guess. This project is one of my favorites. It talks about skeletal restitution, where the skeleton has been unethically obtained by the institute when it was during the apartheid in South Africa. So these skeletons were found and they shouldn't have been there. So the university wanted to repatriate those remains back to the community. So this was more, I wouldn't say community, it's community-led, where the community was consulted on every single step, on every single decision that was made, down to the color choices of the facial depiction. Do they want it in black and white? Do they want it in a sepia tone? Do they want it in color? All of these were communicated with the community leaders, where conversations, as you can see here, has been sat down, where Catherine and Caroline has led this project. So the descendants' families also use this facial depiction for the reburial process as well, which is very nice. So something a little bit more modern. So hands up if you play games. One person, thank you. So Epic Games has a plugin called MetaHuman. MetaHuman and Epic Games is free. So everybody, if you have, watch a few YouTube videos, you can probably go home and create your own metahuman. It is something that we have been using this for quite a lot in the past 3 years, I would say. And I'll just show you some of the case studies. This is a interface where you can create facial avatars. And in this case, you can scan a face and you can put it into the program and you will get an avatar of yourself. So this is one of the faces we created with the metahuman, but also with a lot of additional accessories and based on historical records. Taking you back to medieval Sweden. So in medieval Sweden, this is the kind of clothing they might have worn. This is the kind of headgear that they might have worn, called the capuchon. What we did is we used some bed sheets to wrap it around the head. We scanned the headpiece and then we just lifted it and put it onto the model. And you can see with the face, we actually did very minimal work on the texture side because it's all generated by MetaHuman in the Unreal Engine environment. So it made our workflow a lot faster, a lot nicer to look at, I would say, and it is quite pleasant in terms of the detail that you can get from it. So here is a AR output as well. The museum is also promoting digital accessibility with every single part of the museum. So as you're going around the exhibits, you can use your phone to scan everything, and the museum comes alive through your phone, through the AR interface. And because the genetic material wasn't good, they couldn't get a good enough sample to do the phenotypic analysis. So they suggested the 3 most common phenotypes in Norway, modern population. So they were depicted with 3 different colors in a variation. So you got red hair, blue eyes, blonde hair, more like blue-green eyes, and the dark brown hair with sort of brown-green eyes. So you can also animate MetaHuman, and this is the default animation that you can get from there. And later on, I'll show you one where you can actually make it talk. So here you can see the faces slowly being built up. And this was actually for a television program depicting the historical people of Ireland. So you can see the detail on the face and the eyebrows is quite good. You still have to make your own hair using a different software, or we still have to make the hair using a different software, just because the preset hairs from MetaHuman is not quite compatible. This is another case where we use MetaHuman, but also with a lot of additional accessories. So she was a princess, or she was thought to be the princess. They cannot prove or disprove whether or not the remains were of the princess. And here you can see the historical records was based on different artifacts where we have generated the jewelries from. And so as the clothing is from the fabric that's found, historical fabric. So this is one of our most recent facial depiction projects from Colombia. These are the Colombia masked skulls, where the skulls were actually presented with the mask on them. So the ancient people has modeled the face on top of the skull. And using MetaHuman, we were able to generate the face, building up the face, and generate the textures using the MetaHuman workflow. This was presented in Cusco, in Peru, in the World Mummy Congress back in August 2025. So there are 4 individuals, and these are actually the sizes of their face. You can see some are bigger than others, and actually when you hold the skull, that's the size it is, and we can see that because we printed them out as well. So this was a very successful exhibition with the audience because they were able to pick up and see the skull, and they can remove the mask element from the skull so they can see the skeleton underneath. So we have donated this set of 3D printed material to the Columbia Anthropological Institute. So it is now with them for research purposes. And hopefully we will be able to do a little bit more public engagement work with them to disseminate to the public and to talk to the public about these ancient artifacts. So how can we make the head talk? So we can actually drive the talking using people who are sat in a room. So you can move your head, and it would drive the avatar to make it move. This is actually a project that's been ongoing for the past 10 years. Not that it took 10 years to make the face, but it took 10 years to get the speeches correctly. So this is King Richard III. Some of you may know, or some of you may not know, depending on your interest in the English history. So he is said to be the long-lost king, and not a lot of scriptures has been written about it, because the next king, which was one of the Henrys, has sort of just erased the existence of Richard III. And he is a person depicted in Shakespeare to be a monstrous figure. And what they wanted to say is this is propaganda, Tudor propaganda, where perhaps the person wasn't like this, but for political power they have to say, your previous king was no good, I'm the best. So that's the kind of narrative this was taken. So they had to get the voice profiling. The linguist and the specialist had to make sure that the speeches were correct, pronounced in a certain way, and the letter that he wrote from is a letter that he has written personally in talking about his son. So it's the historical context and the authentication of the piece. That's what took 10 years. Hopefully I can play you a little bit. Not sure if it works. Maybe it doesn't. No, it doesn't. So can you have a, let's see, the back. You can find it on YouTube, don't worry. So if you Google King Richard III, face lab, you should be able to get that on YouTube. So here are just some of our public engagement work. We regularly engage with the museum, especially the ones that we actually have facial depiction in, to ask the public, what do you think about these faces? And get them to fill out a little questionnaire. We've also recently interviewed quite a few different curators, and asking about how the curators felt about the facial depictions that's been in the space. How do you think the facial depiction functioned as a medium to communicate whatever the aim of the museum? So going through some of these are museum outreach, but some of these are just pictures up in festivals, and sometimes we are involved in, we're involved in quite a lot of documentaries and on television work as well. So these are the different mediums of which we will engage with the public. So this is fresh results that I've put in this week. So on the left is a few questionnaires from the general public, and I can just read a little bit about this, so hopefully the translators can pick that up. So, person who we interacted with in the museum have said, rather than just a skeleton that you can't relate to, the face reinforces that person was a real live person, like people today. There are also comments like, it's extremely fascinating and interesting, it's very important in understanding human history, we have to learn to experience the past, and the facial reconstructions allow us to connect with the past. So we're using a lot of this very rich data to hopefully write more about the function of facial depiction. With the semi-structured interviews with the curators, that was also very interesting. Because it talked a lot about empathy, they wanted the face to communicate with the people and to get people to think about the empathy. It's no doubt, really, that connecting with somebody who lived in the past so visually is really striking for lots of people. And they have very immediate sort of visceral reaction to looking at the facial reconstruction that can be achieved now. So it's about evoking the emotion of the general public when they look at a face. Rather than just looking at a skeleton, the interaction with a face, I would say definitely is different. A lot of curators talked about the objectification of human remains, where human remains has also been treated as objects, not individuals. We do feel that the faces can offer more of a personable experience for visitors to visit the museum, to not only look at the skeletons as objects, but to view people as individuals. So yes, hopefully I am within time and everybody is still awake, but yes. Thank you very much.
네, 제시카리우 책임연구원님의 과거 인물의 얼굴 재현 과정에 대한 발표를 들으셨습니다. 여러분 다시 한번 큰 박수 부탁드리겠습니다.